A very good afternoon to all. My name is Jasmine and welcome to our webinar, Leverage Cloud Technologies to Maximize Productivity. Service 4.0 is the next paradigm shift in the future of services. Now, more than ever, businesses must transform to meet changing customer needs quickly, innovate, and create new value to stay relevant and differentiate themselves from competitors. To achieve this, cloud is the way to go. To optimize your company's resources, enable efficient collaboration, and ensure customer satisfaction, it is critical to understand cloud technologies so that you can make the right investment and deployment decisions. In this session, our panel of industry speakers will share on primary factors to decide which cloud technologies to adopt for various workloads, business and technical considerations for cloud decisions, such as regulatory compliance and data gravity, insights from real-life use applications of private, public, and hybrid cloud infrastructure approaches, and the emerging cloud trends and opportunities to look out for. We'd like to thank our partner, Nutanix Singapore, and our supporting associations, ESPRI, ITMA, and SPF for their support in making this webinar possible. Before we start the webinar proper, allow us to share some functions of the webinar. By making a recording of this session, and it will be available on demand one day after the event. The presentation slides of the presenter will be shared with the participants after the webinar for those of you who complete the post-webinar survey. Attendees who participate in the webinar survey will receive a $20 GrabFood gift card each. Hence, please stay on with us till the very end of the webinar. There will be a live Q&A after the panel discussion. You may use the Zoom Q&A function and post in your questions. Please help us to indicate your name and company name when submitting them. A selection of the questions will be answered. Without further ado, I would like to introduce and invite our SG Tech Cloud and Data Chapter Chairman, Mr. Gunnar, to give his welcome address and introduction. Gunnar has been in the IT software industry for over 25 years in various leadership roles. Currently, he is the country manager for Singapore at Red Hat, where he leads sales and business development activities in the country. Over the years, Gunnar has been extensively involved in the implementation of complex analytics solutions, such as supply chain, customer experience, and risk management across the world in various industries ranging from financial services, government, manufacturing, and retail. Now let's welcome Gunnar. Gunnar, over to you.
Thank you, Jess. Hi, everyone. Very good afternoon. Thank you for joining us at this event. Let me just give a quick introduction on SG Tech. I believe most of you would be familiar, but SG Tech, which is previously known as the Singapore IT Federation, represents the IT community or the community of IT companies in Singapore. It's got members from all different types of IT organizations. And what we try to do is we try to represent the needs and requirements of the IT industry. And I represent the Cloud and Data Chapter, which represents organizations that are planning to move to a cloud. It includes organizations that are public cloud provider, organizations that actually provide, for example, private or on-premise cloud infrastructure as well. The Cloud and Data Chapters is, just like as I am, everyone in the Exco are volunteers. I myself are from Red Hat. We have people within the committee that are from public cloud providers, as well as organizations like Nutanix. We've got organizations like system integrators like NCS or ST, as well as born on the cloud solution players, for example, like Xero, for example. So we do have a widespread of members within the committee to try and advise both the government, help the community in a way to help them embrace the cloud as the technology to do business. So as part of that, we've actually now working with Nutanix to launch this event. And we've got Edward from Nutanix, as well as from Bernard from National Computing Center, as well as Joe from Changi Airport, to also share their point of view. And later on, we'll introduce them. So try and give you a flavor of how and what organizations should be doing to look at leveraging cloud to maximize the productivity. So with that, let me hand back to Jess. Thank you.
Thanks, Gunnar, for your introduction. Right. Next up, we will have Mr. Edward Loh, CTO System Engineering Lead at Nutanix Singapore, to give us his presentation on understanding cloud decisions to maximize efficiency and productivity. Edward is the current CTO for Nutanix Singapore and regularly speaks at events for Nutanix. He also heads up the technical pre-sales organization in Nutanix, and he's responsible for driving overall pre-sales excellence and directly manages the Singapore pre-sales team to deliver profitable and sustainable sales growth. Prior to joining Nutanix, Edward has extensive working experience in VMware and Citrix, focusing on pre-sales consultancy and technical roles. He's well-versed in new technologies related to data center technologies, DevOps, and specific applications. Edward, please.
Thank you, Jess. So let me just share my screen. I'm going to go to fine. Just make sure.
Oh, good.
Yeah, thank you. So again, my name is Edward. So thanks to SG Tech as well, and as well as the panel speakers later. So my name is Edward. I'm from Nutanix. Very happy to be here for this event, and very happy to see you guys over virtually. So allow me to, I guess, set a little bit of context first before I go into my slides, right? So I guess the topic you guys can read over here is understanding cloud decisions to maximize efficiency and productivity, right? So I would like to position this as more of a sharing, right? Rather than, something that I tell you to do or somebody else tells you to do or so on and so forth, right? So I guess there's no correct right or wrong answer over here. So we're just sharing perspectives as well as the different kinds of factors that will go into a decision on what to do with your IT cloud strategy, right? So with that, I think Jess did give an introduction of myself earlier, so I'm not going to go too much into it. So going into the slides proper, right? So before I start, I think just a simple demographics from IDC, right? So I think over here, what you can see, right, based on the studies from IDC is multi-cloud strategies are primarily going to be the norm, right? Moving forward, right? They did mention that 97% of them are going to go with a mix of both public and private clouds, right? In terms of workloads, I guess on the right side of the screen, right, from your slides, right, you can actually see what the various workloads that some of the participants of the survey will be using for, right? But I think those are not unfamiliar to most of you guys, hopefully, right? So with that, right, that will be the kind of the context that I will be taking, right, going into, the slides. So firstly, right, let's look at one facet of the cloud, right, which is the public cloud, right? I think cloud today means quite a fair bit of things to many, many different folks, right? But I guess in most folks' definition, right, when we start talking about the word cloud, majority of the time, I guess we mean the public cloud, right? And of course, if you look at the public cloud today, right, you notice that they are primarily dominated by three players, right? I think those are no stranger to everyone else on the call today, right? They are basically Microsoft, Amazon, and of course Google, right? The primary dominant players. So from a public cloud perspective, I guess there are certain aspects of things that we come to expect out of the public cloud. And of course, these are the benefits that have been widely mentioned, right? Not just by myself, but I guess by quite a fair bit of people, right? You talk about things like, software defined, you talk about things like agility, rapid deployment, right? A single management interface, right? Whereby you log onto any of the public cloud vendors today, right? You are going to get faced with a single management interface, right? And of course, continuous innovation. So one of the key value propositions of the cloud, right? Besides being the rapid agility is the continuous innovations that they keep putting in, right? So if you've been attending some of the, I guess the forums or the user conferences for some of these major cloud vendors, you notice that new features and functionalities typically come out on I guess a timeline of maybe even a few months, right? As compared to traditional software, right? Whereby you can expect major release from software vendors in, maybe 6 months to 1 year's time, right? So that's really on a different scale, right? And of course, part of the advantage of being in the public cloud is they can kind of do this on the fly, right? Schedule for a downtime, send out a notice, and voila. After the upgrade, you get new features and functionalities. That's part of their continuous innovation. And of course, last but not least, fractional economics, right? I think the world is also moving into I guess a subscription kind of model era, right? With all the various companies, and I guess even ourselves as consumers, right? I'll give another example, right? I'm sure that Squid Game is one of the most popular topics that Singaporeans have been mentioning, especially over the last, couple of days or couple of weeks, right? So, and of course, part of that comes from Netflix, another cloud vendor, right? You may not think of them as a cloud vendor, but I do classify them as a cloud vendor, right? They basically give you subscription services to shows, right? But end of the day, they are a cloud vendor today, right? Maybe not in the cloud in the sense of the IT world, but still a cloud vendor. And of course, the array of services that public cloud provides, all the innovations that they do, all the features and functionalities that they offer, so on and so forth. I think that's part of the attractiveness of the public cloud today that we have all gotten used to, right? But of course, there are also trade-offs, right? Public cloud is all good and great, right? So, but of course, having learned to live with some of this, right, and as well as internally within Nutanix, we consume quite a fair bit of public cloud services as well. So, some of the challenges mentioned, right, as part of adopting a public cloud model is in terms of as well as management, right? I guess most of us have been used to the traditional on-premise deployments. So when I start to onboard a public cloud, right, one of the key challenges that we find, right, when we talk to both our customers and experiencing it ourselves is the consistency, right? The concept can be similar, but when it goes to the public cloud or even to different public cloud vendors, they kind of have different names and terminologies for it, right? So that's kind of figuring out where, or what they mean, right, when they give me a new term, right? So when I first touched AWS, they give me this idea of VPC. I was thinking, what is VPC, virtual private cloud? Or is there another cloud? No, but actually it's a networking stack, right? So terminologies that you have to get used to. And of course, you need your ecosystem support, right? AWS, of course, cannot do everything by themselves, much as they would like to, right? And much as they would like to and much as they wish to. It's not possible for them to do everything themselves, right? They still have to have your ecosystem backup, and you still have to have your applications, your ISVs, your supporting infrastructure, so on and so forth. And of course, one of the key things, right? Data governance and sovereignty, right? I think that's going to be an ongoing topic that's going to be debated endlessly, right? There's not going to be a right or wrong answer in terms of data governance, right? And of course, different countries is going to have their own data governance. Different companies is going to have their own data governance. Your own company is going to have your own governance in terms of what is allowed to be stored, in the public or on premise, so on and so forth. So these are all rules and regulations that we have to adhere to, right? Especially when we do business, whether be it working for a specific company or doing business in a specific country. Of course, the other thing that you also talked about is, traditionally every one of us is on premise. When we start to move to the cloud, right? How do I migrate? Do I do a lift and shift, right? Which is the easiest way that I can think of, or do I want to think about re-platforming? Right? Re-platforming meaning, code this thing entirely from a public cloud perspective. Of course, there's another ongoing debate about lift and shift versus re-platforming, right? Lift and shift is typically easier. Re-platforming is going to be way harder, right? But of course, both have their pros and cons as well. And of course, SLA management and egress courses, right? I didn't even know there was such a thing called ingress or egress, right? Until I start to learn a little bit more about public clouds. So I'm sure that majority of those that are very familiar with the public cloud today, right, will know what egress cost means, right? And I think there's a particular point that I really put an asterisk to it, right? It's in terms of SLA management, right? I guess that's something that's important, right? But I'm not sure whether a lot of people, when they start adopting the public cloud, right, they actually really thought about this SLA management. Some of the customers, right, or even some of the partners that I've spoken to, right, in even as recently as a few months back, the public cloud has been there for some time, right? It's not new, right? It's been there for so long. And of course, AWS has grown to a very, very big giant today. But somehow, I think when I talk to customers about SLA management, right, I think they still don't have a good grasp of what's the typical SLA that's given by the public cloud vendors today, right? Again, this is nothing secret, right? This is widely available. You can go and Google for it. It should be on the websites of each of the public cloud vendors. But typically, they fall in the range of 99.95%, right? That's quite standard, okay, across the board. Of course, if you have a SLA requirement that is higher than 99.95 potentially, right? Again, that will be one of the considerations, right? Because again, 99.95 is by no means a very high rate, right? Because we've been through that phase. You know, I've even, looked at tender or requirements that talks about, SLA requirements of 5 nines or 6 nines, right? So 5 nines or 6 nines is very different from a 99.95% SLA management. Okay, so of course, these are some of the public trade-offs, right? In terms of, utilizing the public cloud. So of course, there's a balance always, right? So at first glance, right? So the other important aspect of things, I guess, is with regards to economics. Nothing goes away from a monetary conversation nowadays, right? In IT, right? Because everything goes back to how much am I willing to spend versus how much am I getting out of the technology, right? So I guess from a first glance, public cloud may seem somewhat cheaper, right, as compared to on-premise. Because again, if you look at, you factor in all the required things, or if you go through a typical TCO ROI study, right? So some of the TCO ROI studies may look, again, cheaper, right, from a initial OPEX versus CAPEX perspective. Because again, the primary monetary or primary commercial model of the public clouds today, right, really falls into an OPEX model rather than a traditional CAPEX model as compared to typical on-premise deployments as well as projects. I think the interesting thing would be to actually look at the costs comparatively as well as accurately, right? So we find that, in this aspect, right, we tend to use a multi-year TCO model to more accurately compare costs, right? Rather than a 1 year upfront comparison, you may want to look at a 3-year comparison or even something further than that, right? And of course, when you compare, it's not just the hardware, software licenses that you will typically look at, right? I would say that you need to look at further things, right? Of course, power and cooling, right? Because that's part of the on-premise requirements, okay? You may not see that item float up in your public cloud cost because, again, that is factored into whatever the public cloud vendors charge you today. And of course, data center space, right? Same thing, right? The public cloud vendors will factor this into their costs, okay? But you need to factor it into your on-premise cost. And of course, your Ethernet telecom, right? So this one is something that may or may not be factored by your public cloud vendor. Depends on how you want to do your connection to the public clouds, right? Whether you want a VPN or whether you want a dedicated link, that in which case you will start to talk to your ISPs, so on and so forth, right? And this can come up to quite a fair bit, right? Especially depends on your requirements in terms of bandwidth, right? For some customers, we have even seen, that figure go into the 5-6 figure on a per month basis, right? Which is quite a fair bit, right? So that's why I say this is a very important thing to look at. And of course, last thing, your FTEs, right? Your full-time employees, how much you're paying them, how much will you need to manage them, right? Of course, these are all things that you will typically look at, right? So from that perspective, right? So again, if you have a tool today that can dynamically help you to input all these costs and show you comparatively wise, right? What would be good for you, right? So there are a couple of tools that, is out there in the market today, right? Of course, we have something from Nutanix that helps you with respect to this. I'm sure there's something out there in the market that you may be familiar with, right? That you can just input in some of the matrices so that you can dynamically compare this cost, right? So it's important, right? Because again, this should be granular down to what kind of workloads do you want to put in the cloud, right? So that gives you a dynamic overview of, which would make the more sense, right? Whether I want to deploy this on private or I want to deploy this in the public cloud. So why move, right? After all these things, right? You may be thinking, right? Wow, so many things to consider. Why move? But of course, there's always reasons, right? So if you look at the typical on-premise deployments, right? This is a very simplistic view, right? You deploy servers, you go for networking, you have your centralized storage, right? So, but of course, this thing, right, is what drove people, right, to consume the public cloud today, right? And I think this is one of the main reasons, right? Because again, data centers today on premise are very complex, right? That's reality, right? That's a reality. IT has gotten so complex that we really need something that simplifies this. And the public cloud is an easy silver bullet today, right? To remove the complexity by letting AWS or Microsoft or Google manage all that complexity for you, right? In terms of scaling and things like that. And to give you an idea of complexity, this is exactly what you leave behind, right? So there's no need for me to go into each of the individual elements inside this slide, right? But if I just take a look at this slide, I will feel overwhelmed, right? At first glance, right? Different aspects of IT that I need to look at for different businesses, different silos that I want to buy. If I have one person want to purchase one project for one specific project for one budget, and I have to buy, I have to manage, this is what I really leave behind, right? And of course, if I move a little bit further, right, in terms of cloud pitfalls, right? Moving into cloud pitfalls, right? When I say I want to leave all this complexity behind, right? So what are the various things that potentially I need to be looking at, right? Infrastructure focus, right? Do I need to be looking at siloed organizations? What is my data center footprint? Again, some of the previous considerations that we talked about, right? Especially in terms of comparing costs, power and cooling. Do I directly manage it myself? Do I outsource this to a vendor, whereby I can have a vendor manage the physical aspects of the data center while I just concentrate on the IT, right? How many vendors do I need to deal with, right? Whether be on the private cloud or whether be in AWS, right? I'm sure when you go to AWS, you may not necessarily just deal with a single vendor as well, right? And so of course, the complexity with all these things. So what happens, right? So this is of course nirvana, right? Imagine if IT could satisfy something like that, right? I don't need to worry about hardware refreshes, capacity planning cycles, I just need to focus on my strategic priorities, right? What if I could integrate faster with dev tests, right? That's why there's this concept of DevOps today, right? Development come operations, right? What if I could be scalable and agile enough, right? Such that, anywhere with regards to my applications, regardless of where they live, right? What if I could eliminate all the silos and have a big pool of resources that I could convert into usage for all my different business units, right? Regardless of where, right? And of course, create a single governance across every one of them. So I would say that, architecture really matters, right? So if you go back to this, again, this diagram of, it's very simple technology, right? Compute, network, storage, right? If you look at how the public cloud vendors, or what I would call a hyperscaler, right? I think hyperscalers are another term that we use quite interchangeably, right? They have already done this in a very different way, right? If you look at the stack on the left, primarily what they have done is they have used software to really tackle this problem, right? They have not created a silo, right? Whereby I segregate server versus networking versus storage, but just a single software stack in order to easily scale. And of course, all this has definitely been proven, right? I think I don't need to mention names, right? The names over in the left-hand side already shows you that they have done things in a scale that nobody has done, right? Way beyond the scale of what each of us as a company has done, right? So if we could come up with a software architecture, right, regardless of whether be it on premise as well as in the cloud, I think that it will be an ideal state that, we want to really go to, right? So of course, from a designing from the future perspective, these are also all the various I think factors that we really want to consider, right? Number one, being software defined. Number two, as much as possible, I would like a unified management console, right? May or may not be possible today, but as much as possible, reducing the amount of consoles that my administrators or my users or my FTEs need to manage, right? In terms of, the amount of consoles that they need to touch today, right? Compute data services, network security services, definitely always a consideration. If possible, if I could have them cloud agnostic, right? Cloud agnostic meaning I can have the same model of management across different cloud models, different public clouds, whether be it Amazon, whether be it Azure, or whether be it on-premise, right? And I want a way to automate my tasks, across a multi-cloud platform, as well as making it easy for me to do potentially cross-cloud migrations. Why is that important? I'll talk about that in a while's time, right? I think the why is cross-cloud migration important is primarily today, right? We don't just want to depend on a single cloud, which is why the conversation revolves around multi-cloud. Okay, so it's not just hybrid cloud, but multi-cloud. Hybrid cloud, my definition will be private, public, hybrid. Multi-cloud will potentially be same thing. I can have private, I can have public, but many favors of the public cloud. Right? I think IT organizations are also evolving, right? Beyond just adopting a single public cloud to potentially moving into multiple public clouds, consuming different kinds of services, leveraging what I would call a best of breed, right? Best of breed meaning I get the best services that's available that AWS is known for, I get the best services that Google is known for, and I get the best services that Azure is known for, right? And mix and match, right? Being able to leverage cross-cloud migration. Okay, so to do a little bit, I guess, on marketing from a IDC perspective, again, operational simplicity leads to cost efficiency, right? I think from that perspective, from a Nutanix perspective, I guess we have been helping our customers over the number of years to reduce their TCO. And of course, as part of that process, reduce downtime, and of course, from an ROI perspective, right, getting back the ROI in terms of less than a year, and of course, making more money per year, right, additional revenue for you. Okay, so the decision, right, the tough question to ask yourself, right, or ask ourselves today, right, what to decide, when do I go public versus when do I go private, right? There's always two aspects of it, right? One is, of course, from a business perspective, and of course, the other aspect is from a technical perspective, right? So there will always be two teams, two sides of the coin, right? And maybe if ideally I can find a good balance of both. So if I look at the business aspect of things, right? So from a business standpoint, again, going back to key factors like what is my risk tolerance, right? Again, this ties back to one of my earlier points to talk about SLA management. Right? What's the amount of SLA that the business requires? What's the RPO, RTO that the business requires, right? In this aspect, the RPO, RTO is not physical, it's not an IT terminology anymore, but it ties back to the business. What is acceptable to the business, right? So that comes in the forms of risk tolerance, okay? Again, cost, always a factor. I talk about comparing costs. How much is the business prepared to pay, right? Depends on what risk they want to take. And so, and of course, the regulatory compliances, in terms of what are the rules and regulations that I need to conform with when I'm doing business with a specific company, when I'm doing business in a specific country, so on and so forth, right? So, of course, from a IT perspective, then what cloud you want to use, right? So far, I've limited the discussion of the cloud, right, revolving mostly around IaaS and PaaS, right? There's of course other flavors of cloud available today, like software as a service, right, where they provide you pure software services. So we shall exclude that portion from the discussion today and just focus on IaaS and PaaS, right? What is the ecosystem that I need to deal with, especially like I mentioned, right, when I need to pull in additional vendors, backup vendors, example, right? How do I integrate with backup vendors? How do I train and migrate my staff, right? I think one of the important decisions, right? What's the skill set level of my technical people today, and how do I upskill them? Again, I think to dive a little bit further into granularity, right? I really encourage everybody to look at it from a workload application perspective, because again, end of the day, right, regardless of infrastructure IT, your workloads and applications are what the business is concerned with, right? They are not going to think about how much compute do I have, and because to the business, the applications is the one that drives my business, right? It's the one that really generates profit and margins and revenue for the company, a profit center per se, right? That's where the applications and workloads lie, right? Strategic business priorities, right? Staff training, hiring, regulatory requirements, against some of the things that I did mention earlier, right? On a per workload basis, right? You then think of the risk of migration, right? And of course, the cost of refactoring your application. So again, notice that I did speak a bit about this earlier, right? And I did start this thing, right? Because again, there's always the argument with regards to lift and shift versus refactoring. Refactoring is a long and tedious process, right? A lot of the applications today are not really coded in, I guess, the cloud native, format, right? And to change this to cloud native requires quite a fair bit of decisions, quite a fair bit of migration, quite a fair bit of effort as well as cost, right? So again, this needs to be weighed out, right? So if there's a need in terms of time, speed, agility, sometimes people live and shift. Again, like I said, there's no right or wrong. There are pros and cons to each and every approach. Data gravity, application customizations, okay, workload scalability, capacity needs, latency tolerance. I think that's something that's relatively important for a lot of the customers that we speak to today. How much latency is the business allowed to tolerate, right? Because again, when you create your on-premise data centers, right, chances are that you create a private link, right, between your users and the data center, right? If I were to move that to the cloud, do I want to have the same kind of SLA in terms of that link, right? And who is going to guarantee me, the latency for that link? And again, if I want a 5 millisecond link, how much is that going to cost me on a per month basis, right? And of course, back to the age-old question of SLAs, right? SLA is always important, right? I've talked quite a fair bit about it. So again, those are individual decisions that you dive deep into, right? As compared to the earlier slide, whereby you look at things holistically speaking. And now what I'm doing is I'm driving down to on a workload per application basis. And how do we consider, right? What are the different decision points to make decisions for each and every workload, right? Which I think should be done. So again, last but not least, right? So some of the key takeaways, I guess I would like, for the audience here to do, right? Again, prepare for a hybrid world. That revolution is already here, right? I don't think we need to argue about it, right? It's already here, okay? Think about your workloads at an individual workload level, right? Right in the cloud, for each and every workload, right? I think that should be a decision point that should be made, right? On where to run in which cloud, right? Of course, once the decision has been made, right, on a workload basis, right, ongoing, there needs to be evaluations on how to continuously optimize costs and resources, right? It doesn't have to be a one-time process, right? Doesn't mean that today I've already made the decision to put this workload onto a public cloud. Doesn't mean that it cannot change a year later, right? Situations change. And of course, look at economic advantage, right? For a in-depth look on what is your views as well as your various economic factors. So with that, thank you very much for the quick 20 over minutes. And I'm going to hand this session back to Jess.
Thank you so much, Edward, for the insightful presentation. Now we will actually move on to the panel discussion. Let me just share the screen again. Today, right, we are pleased to have two invited guest panelists who will join Gunnar and Edward in the discussion. First, we have Mr. Chiu, Vice President, Digital and Data Management System of Changi Airport Group. Joe works closely with key stakeholders to strategize, lead, develop, and implement IT programs that are aligned with the company's digital master plan. He oversees two of the digital transformation tracks, connecting to customer trust, which aims to deliver highly personalized and user-centric services to customers, and innovation with information trust that provides more data-driven, relevant, and timely info to customers and stakeholders with good use of data management, analytics, and AI. And for the second invited panelist, we have Mr. Bernard Tan, Director, Strategy Planning and Engagement at National Supercomputing Center. Bernard has been instrumental in planning and executing national advanced research programs that utilize supercomputing capabilities. With over 20 years of global technology experience with multinational companies like IBM, Red Hat, and as a technopreneur, Bernard is always at the forefront of bringing emerging technologies to the commercial and public sectors with his global markets knowledge and hands-on approach. We'd now like to invite Gunnar and Edward back onto the screen to join Joe and Bernard for the fireside chat and Q&A session. The session will be moderated by Gunnar, So for participants out there, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask any of the panelists, you can use the Zoom Q&A function and submit them. We will answer your questions when we come to the Q&A itself, right? Gunnar, over to you.
Thank you, Jess. So as everyone, the key thing is that I'll go through a few questions that I've jotted down from the presentation, but again, the questions from the audience is important. So if you have questions, just put it in the chat. After we've gone through the initial set of questions, I'll pop over to the Q&A. So thanks, everyone. So thanks, Joe, Bernard, and Edward for joining us. So maybe since Edward, you just finished, let me just ask you a question, right? Everyone talks about cloud and moving things to a cloud, but how do I actually ramp up? What are the skill sets that my team requires, especially in a multi-cloud environment? In current constraints, whether it's because of COVID or a skills crunch, could you share a bit about what we do and how we can go about getting the skill sets upgraded in my team?
Sure. Thanks, Gunnar, for that. I think primarily I have three approaches, right? So first is start simple. I guess start simple, but have a long-term goal, right? So what I did for some of my team members was, set them a KPI in terms of achieving some basic cloud certifications, right? Any cloud certification that they want, right? They can go to any of the three that's, prevalent today, or even if there's something that, they wanted to pick up, I think align this to their interest, right? But get them interested and set a longer term strategy. So what I actually did was that, I actually did some research on some of the cloud certification paths, and I shared them with the team, right? So to encourage them to, go on to the so-called the cloud provider of their choice, of their interest, get them started in terms of some of the basic certifications, right? Achieve it within, let's say a realistic time frame, like maybe within the next few months or so. I'm happy to, maybe even look at sponsoring some of their, courses, if the company is agreeable to doing so, right? And of course, from a technology standpoint, right, dump it down to something that they can understand today. I guess some of the core concepts for the public cloud vendors are relatively simple, similar across the three vendors, right? For example, if I look at AWS versus Azure versus Google, right? If I talk about things like serverless computing, right? AWS has a Lambda, Azure has the Azure functions, and Google, they call it Google functions, right? It's different names, but they primarily mean the same thing. Right. So if there's something that they're interested in, encourage them to understand it, right? And of course, select the vendor of their choice that they want to onboard. And of course, the last thing, right, is looking at, talking to them about the career today. I guess in IT, there's been quite a fair bit of explosion in terms of things we have to learn in the last few years. As IT professionals, unfortunately, that's kind of our life, right? So especially if we want to, remain relevant in the world, right? So I think from their career perspective, encourage them to start looking at, what do they want to do in their career? How do they want to progress in their career? And, draw analogies to things that they are doing today that is relevant, right, inside the new world. For example, things like, the hot jobs today, right? So some of the articles I've read, there are things like DevOps, SRE, right? Site reliability engineers, right? But of course, they used to be a mix of what people call developers or system administrators in the past, right? It's just that today you have an extended set of skill sets that the business wants you to do. But of course, the core skill sets still remaining relatively similar, right? So think of it that way, right? So you could potentially ask your guy who is a developer today or who is a sysadmin today, right, to become, hey, look at becoming a DevOps engineer, right? That's sexy, right? Become an SRE, or what used to be called data analyst, right? Call them a data scientist, right? It's part of their core jobs today, right? And, get them to feel that they are being relevant to the industry today. I guess that's kind of how I would do it, right? Encourage them to learn and give them a roadmap.
Understand. But Edward, I think you gave a clear picture on the nice graphics on moving from on-premise model to a single cloud, and you also emphasize that the cloud technologies can be deployed on-premise, so you get the agility on-premise. But a lot of organizations, maybe in day one, really want to go cloud first or cloud only or one cloud only kind of push. While we know that the end state, and we've seen that happen with a lot of the organizations that actually when completely public cloud on when they initially wanted the agility, but in the end they moved back to a more balanced approach of having things on premise or things on multi-cloud. So what would your advice be for organizations, right, that they're starting now and they're getting pushed to go just cloud first or single cloud? How do they proceed with a hybrid multi-cloud kind of approach?
Sure. So I think firstly, let me just qualify a little bit, right? So we've talked quite a fair bit about, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, etc., right? So of course, firstly, I have to qualify, right? Our stand is we have nothing against the public cloud vendors today, right? So I think they are very relevant to the conversation that we are having, especially when we talk about cloud, right? So of course, if I were to narrow the scope of, the discussion, right? Cloud players today, besides the big three we mentioned, right? There are also big software as a service cloud vendors like Salesforce.com, right? So which offers you a specific cloud service. So those are kind of excluded from that model, or rather the context of what we are talking today. Also, you are exactly right? Depending on the stage of cloud adoption and where IT is at the moment, if you are just initially starting out as adoption, there's nothing wrong with saying, I just want to evaluate and use a single cloud for the time being, right? But of course, the key consideration should be, what is your long-term strategy, right? For the near future, because of constraints on skill sets, because of constraints on time, right? There's nothing wrong with saying that, at this point in time, I'm just going to think about onboarding to AWS or selected public cloud vendor of your choice. But, as the old saying goes, right, that it's never good to put all your eggs in one basket. I really love, I guess the other thing that I will bring up is Dilbert, right? I think a lot of IT folks are very familiar with this comic strip called Dilbert, right? So there was a very interesting one that I really liked that says that, somebody was mentioning, I migrated all our things to cloud, unfortunately, it went down, I couldn't reach the person, and the boss was just saying, so you lost my whole data center. And he was like looking at him and saying, yeah, kind of, right? So again, I think that story, right, kind of resonate, right? And again, ties back to something. Remember, there was a Facebook outage just, a couple of days back, right? So imagine if all your business relies on Facebook today, right? And Facebook just decides, or maybe it's not their decision, right? I mean, it's not something that they really wanted, but they went offline for 6 hours. Right? And imagine if your critical business or your business critical applications are all on there, right? And you will basically go dark for 6 hours. And at that point of time, assuming if, let's say, 50% of Singapore's IT industry depends on that cloud vendor, right? Then you will be part of that 50% that will go dark for 6 hours, right? So the question will be, from a business standpoint, is that an acceptable risk to you? Right? If you put all your eggs in one basket, right? So that's one example that I will probably give, right? The other example is, I guess there's a trend also, right? In terms of, onboarding public cloud today, right? I think, I guess I'm old enough to say that I've been through that trend just maybe 10 years ago, whereby a lot of companies actually went into this outsourcing trend, right? I guess one of the two examples I'll use regionally will be DBS and Maybank. Right, so remember, DBS at that point did a very big outsourcing contract with IBM, as well as Maybank did a very big one with, I think then was called CSA or CSC, right? So that trend was when everybody thought that outsourcing was the way to go, right? Everybody was advocating that outsourcing, takes away all the complexity of managing IT, etc. Right? But in the end, I think the balance state became that, it should be a little bit of both, right? There's never too much of anything on one side. You shouldn't completely outsource, but yet, completely insourcing doesn't make a lot of sense. So I guess that's kind of the balance that we are coming to in terms of adoption of public cloud technologies today, right? We've been through the initial phase whereby, everybody ramps up to go to cloud, right? But now we are coming to the realization that, there's a balance of everything and, it should be the way to move forward. So I guess that's where I would, encourage our participants to think about, that kind of decisions in terms of adopting hybrid.
Hey, thanks, Edward.
Yeah.
Let me change the speed a bit, right? So let me ask this question to Joe. I mean, we all talk about digital transformation, and Changi Airport is the world's #1 airport. And you guys have been doing a lot of things around digitalization, transforming everything from how you get to the airport, do stuff at the airport, right down to cleanliness of a toilet, right? So you all talk about digital transformation. I think Changi Airport has been doing a lot around this, and your approach, and it's always been everyone's approach to start with cloud. So maybe Joe, you can share with us what Changi Airport has been doing, what are the challenges that you faced, and how did you approach these issues, right? Because you've been down this journey before.
Thank you, Kunal. Thank you, SG Tech, to invite me to do some sharing. I guess people may connotate digital transformation to mostly depends on technologies. Actually, the digital transformation for us is really business transformation in the digital age. In fact, technology is actually probably, I think, 25% of the thing we need. We spend much more time dealing with other aspects. For example, the culture, changing the culture of where we used to be. In Changi Airport, like most of the traditional companies, start with brick and mortar, and digital is only happening in the last 10 years. So we've gone through quite a lot of process. It's not just about IT guy giving a budget to put up all the beautiful solutions. It's rather getting everyone to come together. So number one, of course, culture to align the culture means top down as well as bottom up. So people from the management believe in it. The people in the bottom also understand and be involved heavily. They also agree to do the business process transformation. What you're going to be done in the past, people see you face to face, queuing up, it's no longer working. And we need to find a way for them to come online and to do the same thing, for example, buying products from us. And so that's a very difference of the mindset. And people, especially some of the people who've been adopted the older process, need to change. A lot of time, we need to spend time to re-educate them, making sure they feel comfortable and get the leap of faith to step up to do beyond something that they don't used to do. And the other thing, of course, we want to look into customer experience. You guys are all passengers too, you're travelers. And how do we know able to entice you? How do we get your attention? And how do we build the best UI UX so that I can get you to chip in to give feedback to us or buy things from us online, or maybe even let us know that you're coming to the airport. So many things require interaction with the customers. And of course, other thing is market demand. Whatever you do, there must be a demand. If there's no market, you're wasting your time. So I guess a lot of time we also need to deal with marketing research, customer survey. And the other thing we want to do is most of the solution is complex, involve you to collaborate with, not even within airport, but all the ecosystem airport partner that come together to give the full solutions. So to me, that's actually a big part before I even talk about, I think some of those about cloud and so embracing cloud, which platform. And for that one is a second part that we would normally do. Okay, in regards to my experience about cloud adoptions, we always start with like our CFO will always ask, or CEO will always ask, every time there's a new ideas, we always ask who will benefit, what is the use case, what are the pain points, and who are your target audience, and how do you measure your success? And is there a key success factors in order to make this project successful? So many of these questions are all commercial driven, finance driven, and user driven. Nothing to do with IT yet. We don't talk about IT at that junctions, but IT folks must be involved in the discussions so that you know what they're thinking about and how to ensure your solution meet the needs. And the second is, if you're not sure about what you want, we will always try to go for the agile approach. It's quite a new, not a new word to most of you. People doing it, I think we're doing it. I guess we're really encouraging it. We form many squad team. We want to develop the most viable, minimum viable products. So we easily form 10, 20 squad team in a company across different cluster. People come from one group involved in the other group to do become a Scrum Master, and they involve UI, UX, they involve developments. So we have people, we call it the two-pizza team used by Amazon, very famous terms by Amazon. The two pizza can only shave about 6 to 8 people. And this bunch of folks are the folks we empower them. They help to look into the use case, they run the experiment, they develop a small application, they try the market, And the moment they work, then we go down to the how. Finally, we go to the how, which is the technologies. What Edward talked about, what are the considerations? What platform? Is that on-prem? Is it going to be infra as a service? Is it going to be a platform, or is it software as a service? There are many considerations, and IT, a very important part is we need to recommend to customers what is the best for you. Is it a short-term projects, or this is going to take 5 years to happen? Everything of this require us to give some good reference and recommendations. But most importantly, we own the architecture. We don't let vendor come to sell us for the thing, and we must have our in-house rules. We own our town hall, town plan, and we know the next 5 years, for example, we're going to go for by large decoupling architecture. We don't want to build monolithic architecture solutions. Everything is going to be a stack of service. We want to go for serverless, so we don't rely heavily on traditional cloud hosting environment. So that itself, once you have that blueprint, later on, everything works very nicely. You will tell your user or your IT team, follow these rules to call your tender. And from there, you deploy your solution. So it's actually quite an important aspect. And many people cut the corner by doing some of this. And they will eat the humble pie along the way by doing the wrong thing and invest in the wrong platform. Sorry, that's what I think the key point I want to highlight. In regards to challenge, I think there's always challenges. The vendor will try to lock you up. They want to keep you as long as you want. You buy my CRM and they want you to use it forever because the migration of data is painful, especially if you keep 1A data like your NRIC passport number. For you to bring out from one place to another is painful. Then second, of course, they want to do an integration is also very expensive. Cybersecurity, I think you all know, the moment you do it wrong, you forgot to harden your platform, you get yourself into trouble. Then data protections, especially Cat 1A data. I'm sure Bernard later will talk about this. Data protection is also very, very important to us. If customer complain, I can see another customer record, you're in trouble. So we have to think about how your cloud take care of all these requirements. Then of course, finally, the staff. The staff need to cope with all the new technologies. We must train them, we must motivate them, let them be the owner of the new platform. In that case, they can able to work with the vendor in a very good ecosystem. All right, hope that helps. Gonna come back to you.
Thanks, Joe. I mean, it's always good to listen to an organization that's been on the road, been on that journey. I mean, I'm from Red Hat, so we always talk about open source, open technology, and we always emphasize, right? It's never about technology. Yes, there is a strong importance of technology, but the people, the process, and the platform all need to work together. So when you're starting to put things on cloud, then literally the organization needs to look at it differently. And one of the observations that we've had recently is a lot of organizations at a board level or at a management level, the IT is now sitting at the management level, while it previously used to be operations and finance, but IT has now become a critical player in that decision process as well. But I agree with you, it's not only about technology. So with that, maybe let me spin off to Bernard, right? Bernard, you are a technology guy, national supercomputing, anything to do about technology. I think that's where you are the center of all technology. So how do you see cloud as technology, some of the new ongoing initiatives that National Supercomputing is doing to support companies in their cloud adoption journey, right? So what is it that you do as technology, and how can you help the people on the call?
Thanks, Gunnar, and thank you for having me here today. I mean, first of all, technology is evolving, you know, and whether are you on the bandwagon or not. But having said that, any organization should not be overwhelmed by technology. Naturally, they should embrace technology. Now, whether are you going on-prem or full-on cloud, or it's a hybrid model, I need to emphasize it goes back to your business strategy. I think that's going to be, whether is it going to be a client-facing transformation that you're doing, or it's an internal transformation you're embarking on. Now, an example would be, you know, NSCC is actually a national infrastructure platform that supports the whole R&D community. So as we go along, we are looking at emerging technologies such as quantum technologies, such as quantum encryption, and much more. Now, at the same time, we recognize that what we built to date is very much on-prem, but we also recognize there's a changing usage pattern of users. People are more comfortable using cloud and getting on board on cloud. But we do not just place our money on cloud by building the HPC research cloud just for users, but we also use it from a BCP point of view, business continuity point of view. So the end game is really, what is the strategic outcome that you want to achieve for your organization? I think that's going to be very key in the first perspective. For us, when we actually build, we don't just build for one single reason, but we build for multiple strategic reasons. As I mentioned to you, from BCP to allowing more people to tap onto our national platform to turbocharge and catalyze and accelerate their R&D initiatives. But the other thing that I just want to highlight is that cloud actually gives us a great sense of agility and reach as well. A lot of business opportunity could be conducted on the cloud. Example, like as we are embarking on quantum computing, we are able to do simulation and emulators based on the cloud itself. So what I'm trying to say, and Gunnar, you are from Red Hat, you'll be very familiar. It's all about start small, start fast, fail fast, learn fast, win fast, and then you scale. It doesn't make sense to put all your money into a infrastructure, just like what Joe has mentioned, that you lock yourself up in a particular contract and you'll later learn to regret. But it should be a waterfall approach. From my perspective, it'll be, what's the national agenda that I'm trying to build? How and who are the key audience that I am actually going after? And how am I going to achieve my outcome and KPIs? Thereafter, then I'll consider the right technology platform that I will adopt. But at the same time, it does not mean I'm going to have it in a poker basis all in, right? We are ultimately spending taxpayer money. We must be very accountable. So we will do prototypes. We start small and we test it out. Does it make sense? And does it work on that basis? And once we have proven outcomes, or as what Joe has mentioned earlier, use cases, this is where then we start to scale naturally. Remember, whatever you invest in is not for short term. It is really for the long term. And you must be able to have an infrastructure that you are able to build on top and improve your overall infrastructure. So it must be scalable as well. So it is not investing for now, but rather investing for multiple scalability. Okay, and that's going to be a very key consideration, because as we invest in national infrastructure, like what we do, we make sure that whatever we invest has a long life cycle and a long runway with agility, scalability, and accountability. Okay, I hope that kind of frames where from a national level what we are doing with cloud. So it's not just about a private cloud, public cloud, or multi-cloud, but it has to go into your overall strategic objective that you're trying to achieve. Gunnar?
Yep. Hey, thanks, Bennett. So I agree with you. Like even what Joe said, right? You need to have that blueprint where you want to get to, and if you have that blueprint, then you can go down that route. And I agree with you that look, it doesn't make sense when you're trying things out to investing big in infra or go through the whole process when you can't start quickly, right? The objective is always start small and scale as quickly as you can. Try things out. It's okay if you fail, and then you iterate as you go. So one of the questions that we've got is actually about security. So maybe let me just ask everyone. A lot of people talk about security, especially in COVID, as more and more information goes on to cloud, hybrid cloud or multi-cloud or any cloud, right? what are your views with respect to managing data or the risk associated with data? So maybe Joe, as an organization, you talked about IC numbers, etc. Right? So in Singapore, we got PDPA, we got a lot of rules on data security, data privacy. How is Changi Airport managing the risks associated with this?
Okay. In the past, we leave it to individual IT practitioner to deal with some of these security requirements. But we recognize this is not an easy job, and everyone sees part of the elephants. So since then, we have formed committees. I think about 2 years ago, when more cybersecurity and data protection issue become more important, I think we form a risk assessment team within the company. People make up of legal, people make up of cybersecurity, people make up of data protection and data engineering. So I myself represent the data engineering. And what does that mean is we will, every time a new project need to come on board, they cannot go it until they come to this committee for evaluations. Now, of course, if the project never touch on personal data, we don't want to trouble you. But if you do, we need you to submit a very detailed format. Now, not to exhaust you, but important to highlight what are the risks that we can see. And we were going to ask a lot of questions to ensure that these things are done properly. So it depends on your so-called risk assessment question given to us. If this is Cat 1A, so everyone raised a red flag, and more things we need to ask you from how do you develop your cybersecurity strategy, where do you host your data, how do you protect your data, and whether encryption, masking, many things we need to ask, and how do you keep your data. So I guess this is important for every company who are going to embark this journey to have a team that can go through this important assessment. And for like data documentation, so I look after this data engineering, data documentation. We'll ask the vendors or ask the IT folks, whoever involved with the project, give us your data architecture diagram, give us the data definition, the data mappings, how they map to different systems, and access control, who access to your database, who take care of the Cat 1A data. And again, that helps us to know whether this is well thought of, whether the design meet our requirements. Then of course, followed by, once we sign off with this assessment, they will have to build the solution according to what we recommend. We will audit them, we'll check whether they follow. And through the whole journey, we need them to implement all the necessary things like VPT tests, SOC, IDS, IPS, sorry, a lot of jargons name, but I believe most of you may be familiar with it, that you cannot live a while without doing all this. And we will check, and I got internal audit team to look as a third party. We may look for external auditor to check. So we are going to be need to be quite robust and vigorous and vigilant to ensure everyone follow the rules. Hope this helped to answer the questions.
Yep, thanks. Bernard, any views on this? I mean, you are a technologist here, so everyone talks about things like quantum, etc. So how do you see security on the cloud?
Data is really the new goal, and it is important that you protect your data. And I think I will not re-emphasize the various things that you have said in terms of data security. But I think very important is that from a business point of view, what is data to you? Is it a customer data? Is it a product design? All these are data, right? Is it your simulation, your modeling? There's data, right? I think you need to first be able to understand the importance of data. So you need to classify your data, okay? From confidential, top secret, right down to normal or restricted data, and based on that, then you are able to say what kind of information should be kept on-prem or what kind of data it should be kept on the cloud. Remember, whatever data you put on the cloud, based on my experience, you have a challenge when you bring it back, egress charges. And it's very, very expensive if you bring your data up and down, and it's going to cost you a bomb. So you need to know the levels of the importance of your data sets and where are you going to put your data. Okay, anything that is important to Singapore, obviously it has to be within Singapore. You can't mirror it anywhere else on that basis. So similar philosophy to any SME or even large companies. By having classification of data, you know what to do with this data. Okay, and then together with the security layers that Joe has mentioned, that makes a lot of sense. Then that becomes a real security plan that you have for your data sets. So that's my perspective on that. But having said that, I just want to end with this part here. You know, whether it's cloud, on-prem, or whether it's a means to an end. But more important is really what is the end goal that you want to achieve. You know, and that should be the one that dictates how you are going to execute your plan.
Okay, thanks, Bernard. Let me take another question from the Q&A, right? So any examples of SME that have actually onboarded multi-cloud solutions? And if you can share one of them, maybe Edward, you can share some examples. I'm quite sure there are a lot of organizations that have done multi-cloud, whether using Workday for HR and Xero for your financials and Salesforce for your CRM. So those kind of clouds, I think a lot of people use it, but they don't think of it as multi-cloud. But maybe you can share more experience on how SMEs especially can take advantage of multi-cloud.
Yeah, sure. So I think I'll just quote a simple example from one of our customers that kind of went through the journey, right? So I won't say that they're at the tail end of the journey, right? So it's still a work in progress, right? So I will classify them as an SME, right? So but obviously no names, right? So but they are primarily in the manufacturing industry, right? So we started this, I guess, this journey with them a couple of years back, right? So they were again started off on premise, right? Because they were already in the business for quite some time, right? So they did a fair bit of on premise. Interestingly, we started our journey with them maybe with Microsoft Hyper-V, right? Which wasn't relatively a popular choice, I guess, back then, right? Because VMware was kind of the more popular choice, right? So they actually onboarded, right? So we started going through with them, you know, modernizing their data centers, right, on premise, right? They started adopting technologies, and because I guess from the name, you really realize that they are quite a strong Microsoft supporter, right? So they actually made the decision to onboard Azure as well, right? In the last, I think, just 1 to 2 years ago, right? So they went through that journey to start to onboard Azure, right? And for that, they actually came to us for some inputs as well, right? So we actually shared a fair bit of, you know, what are the workloads they should be onboarding Azure and so on and so forth, right? So they actually successfully onboarded Azure for some of their specific workloads, right? Not the manufacturing related, right? Which they still kept on premise, obviously, right? For some of the things that they run for their plants and stuff like that. But some of the more, I guess, the MIS related workloads, right? Which they didn't fully functionally go onto things like Workday or things like that, right? So it's still internal application, but they actually onboarded that to Azure. So now the interesting thing is they are also looking into other ways to expand some of their capabilities. And again, the hot topic today is about analytics and, you know, data analysis, machine learning, so on and so forth. So of course, being caught up in all that wave, they started thinking about this as well. And again, interestingly, they actually went over to consider Google for this, because they actually felt that Google was kind of the leader, right, in the analytics space, right? They felt that the learning models that Google came up with could really benefit them, right, in terms of training their models and, you know, helping them to make better decisions on their business, right? So I think that's a very simple example of, you know, SME considering different, and again, the environment is not big, right? So if I were to count the amount of VMs, right, they have actually less than 300, right? That's about relatively SME size, right? 300 VMs is not very big, right? So, and some of these VMs, they actually move about 50 or so to Azure, right? And of course, like I mentioned earlier, right, they're also considering Google for storing some of their analytics. And of course, the data will still be on premise. It's just that for some of the information for this machine learning model specific, they actually did a pipeline into the Google Analytics engine and fed them some data and actually got some of the returns back in terms of what the analytics engine came up with. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Edward. I think that was a good point. I mean, it's not a very big customer, but at the same time, they are using multiple cloud, using Google for analytics, Azure for their application, and they started out on-premise as well. So I think we're coming to the end of the time. So maybe I would like to just ask for each one of you to just give 1 or 2 points that you would like to leave the call with, anything as a key takeaway. And maybe we start with Joe.
Yeah, I think back to what Edward just said, every one of you guys, big company, SME, when it comes to all these considerations, ask yourself about what's important and whether you need control. So for example, you want to use cloud to do something quite routine, could be a leave applications, attendance application. You can just buy software as a service, which you don't do much customization. But for your bread and butter business, your core business, it's very difficult to buy something off the shelf and you can configure and meet your needs. Importance, you can consider whether it should be highly customized to your needs, or you buy a product that allows you to do a lot of customization and configurations. That's important for your consideration. And second, of course, I mentioned many times, you must come up with the use case that there must be a way to earn back your investment. Everything you need to deal with finance. You invest X, you must get back Y, and everything you do must be viable to your company, or maybe bring value to your customers. And you must all this consideration constantly ensure that you reach it before you ask for another new dollar. And I think we're very careful how we spend money, especially during COVID period of time, that money is not easy to earn, and you need to really hold everybody, at least meet the minimum standard. And because of disruption, a lot of things change, and you must be able to respond very fast. So just like Changi Airport, we do change a lot, especially now. Imagine because of COVID, we need to set up certain segregation, certain zone, and you come from a high risk country, we need to find a way to take care of your journey. It's no longer in the past, you just land and you can, after clear immigration, you're free to go anywhere. So we need to put a lot of new process to deal with it. So the time to market is important. Then also cost is important. How do you deliver something quickly and making sure it works is important. So we do provide, we call it a small test bed environment in the cloud. So people who don't know what they don't know, try it out, test out really quickly before they put up in the full solutions. So I also encourage everyone to think about, while you look at the user needs, try to think about how to spend minimum and spend only when you're really sure it works, you bring tangible value before you invest more. And you should be able to measure it constantly. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Bernard, any comments?
Just 2 points. First, whatever you're doing, make sure that, as Joe articulated, it must be aligned to your business. I think that is going to be critical. It should not be, IT has no longer be a silo anymore. In actual fact, a lot of technology now drives the business. I think that's going to be very, very critical. Whether you're a CIO, a CTO, or you are a IT director, IT manager, technology is now at the forefront. That's one. The second is really what I've emphasized: start small, start fast, fail fast, learn fast, win fast, scale. I think that's going to be your key. There is no right, there's no wrong. There's only adaptability on that basis. That's all I have to say.
Agreed. Adaptability in this, whether you look at COVID or you look at cloud, I think the key thing is about how you innovate quickly and adapt to the business. Edward, any closing words?
I think similar to what Bernard mentioned, right? I think IT today is really at a different seat on the table, right? I mean, they are getting the seat at the table. So I think as IT practitioners, right, regardless of which level of IT you are at, right, I think it's kind of important to look beyond the technicalities or just the features and functionalities, right, of what the technology is able to offer, right? I think nowadays the conversation that we have with quite a fair bit of, not just with customers, right, or internally, right, is to map, like what Joe mentioned earlier, a use case to the business, right, and how IT is able to contribute to this use case, right, so that, the technology makes sense to you, right? And I think that's the important piece that we want to take away from here.
Agree. So let me just close off the call. Thanks, everyone. We've talked about the agility. We talked about why you need to look at or consideration for a multi-cloud environment. We talked about how, from an organization perspective, the challenges in organization, ensuring that we've got a predefined goals that everyone is working towards, having IT having a key seat at the management, but not being driven completely by IT, but being driven by business goals. The importance of technology and even how the National Computing Centers actually can help with some of the technology adoption. We even talked about skills, capabilities. I think everyone talks about it. And I want to just emphasize the key thing, right? It's all about people, the process, and the platform. It's not just about the technology itself.
Good now. There's one more questions about talent management from one of the audience. Do you want to answer that?
Okay, so just as I was finishing up on talent as well. So, Joe, maybe would you like to comment about how you find talent and keep talent during this pandemic period? Everyone's trying to hire people. So even I'm trying to hire people. So I think everyone is trying to hire people. So yesterday I was on a call last night with a bunch of university graduates telling them why cloud is the right place to invest their career in. So Joe, would you like to add something?
Okay, I think for us, we always see long-term plans for the staff, and we have a good systematic career development plan and competency development plan for the staff. So every one of them given a chance to pick up the space, the area they're interested, and we will always encourage them to take a lot of trainings, certifications. Airport, before being in the airport business, we have an opportunity to travel more frequent than a lot of folks. We are very fortunate to go to see many airports, visit many other places, including all the new startup company, innovation companies. So we always encourage people to learn from the best. At the same time, we also want to giving them the chance to participate for all the squad teams, regardless of your rank, regardless of which department are you. It's all about the same family, and we all hope that we can build more better teamwork. And you can then, in that sense, we got more team spirit. I think we can help to retain staff. Also, we can also bring in more staff to join us. So that's where we're going to. And even during this COVID period of time, I think the team spirit is still high. We remain very committed. And I think the whole team is all about helping us to cope with this difficult period of time. So I think this is the part that I think company also must invest. It's a long-term thing, so it cannot be a short-term. It cannot be just because a small amount of money. It's really about sincerity and really treat the staff with respect. Thank you.
Anything you'd like to add, Bernard or Edward?
Okay, and I think talent, competing for talent has been a real uphill task, probably because they're all recruited with the likes of Red Hat and IBM. Okay, but I have to say that you need to identify what are the key areas that is important to your business, and which are the talents that you consider as core talent that you want to develop for your organization. I think that is very critical. Now, the second thing that which I, through my year of experience, for talent, sometimes please look within your organization. There are talented people who can be upskilled. Okay, and it's important to look in upscaling your people as well and your team as well, and that provides you with ready pool of resources. The only thing is, are you willing to invest in their upskilling? I think that's going to be and it's a continuous process. It's never be ending. I give you an example. High performance computing is very different from quantum computing. It's 100% difference. One's quantum mechanics, and the other one is really from IT school of computing. And that's something that I myself have to continuously learn how quantum computing and quantum physics works, so that we can make sure that we are able to bring this technology to the benefit of Singapore. And it's a continuous learning process. So sometimes it's good to look within and see who you can upskill. That's my comment.
Thanks, Bernard. How about you, Edward?
3 points, I think. So in this pandemic, I think it's getting harder to look for and retain, right? Given that we are not allowed to go out and mix around. So I guess key point, right? I guess show a little bit more concern, right, with your existing staff, right? Like what Bernard said, right? Upskill. I try to do more one-on-ones nowadays, right? So that's more at a granular level, right? Give them maybe a little bit more recognition in terms of what they're doing, as well as finding out where their interest lies and, you know, guiding them on the career path that suits them. So that's in terms of retainment. For looking for new talent, I find that I tend to be a bit more flexible nowadays in looking at skill sets, right? I know that last time when we look at recruitment, what usually the TA team will do is they will throw us a set of requirements, what are the skill sets you're looking for, so on and so forth, right? So I tend to try to look beyond that, right? Look at the basic skill sets, right, that they have, the foundation, and not be too hopped up on, you know, specific skill sets that you really want, right? For example, like, you know, DevOps engineer, end-to-end, you know, DevOps engineer experience for more than 10 years, so on and so forth, right? So I think not too hop up on all these requirements, right? Looking at basic stuff and seeing whether the staff or the person is able to learn, you know, and contribute more on the job. I think that's the key thing. I mean, we need to be way more flexible. There's a lack of talent going around Singapore, given that now we cannot travel, people cannot come in, you know, so on and so forth. I think that's the key point.
Understand. Hey, thanks. Guys, thanks for sharing, Joe, Bernard, Edward. Really appreciate your time. And we had about more than 50, almost 60 people at our peak attendees. So I hope everyone found the session useful. Let me hand the call back to Jess to wrap it up. Thanks, Jess.
Yeah. Thank you to all our speakers for sharing all your insights, right? And of course, we would like to thank our partner, Nutanix Singapore, for supporting this webinar. And we hope that all the attendees here will find the webinar useful. The session has been useful and you have gained, you know, valuable takeaways. Before we end, right, we would like to invite all the participants to complete this short survey so that we can create relevant content and improve for future sessions, right? Attendees who participate in the webinar survey will also receive a $20 GrabFood gift card each. The team at Nutanix will be in touch with you after you have completed the survey. You may scan this QR code on the slide, right, to access to the survey. Or you can also click the link to the survey form, which my colleague has just posted and inserted into the chat, right? Okay. SGTech will also be having the following webinars in the coming weeks. Mission Possible Factory of the Future will cover how Industry 4.0 is revolutionizing the way companies manufacture, improve, and distribute their products. For the Zero Trust Future webinar, we will provide insights to why endpoint security is critical in modern day threat landscape. So do sign up for all these webinars if you are interested to attend. Lastly, we'd like to invite our participants here to follow SGTech social accounts to keep up to date with our upcoming activities, advocacy position articles, industry research reports, and more. Once again, thank you everyone for attending today, and we hope to see you soon again in the next session. Take care and stay safe.